Hello and happy Tuesday evening to everybody after week 5 in the NFL. We are the Brothers of Dynasty, the best fantasy football podcast hosted by three brothers from Rhode Island who believe that every NFL team should always go for 2 and never kick on 4th down because kickers are terrible. I don't know if you guys saw this weekend or not, but kickers be terrible. I have nothing else to say. Yeah, just bad.
Straight awful.
Be Mason Crosby. Kickers be shanking. That's what's happening. I'm your host, Josh Christensen, joined as always by my two brothers, Jay and Andrew. Jay, what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I'm drinking some Moat Mountain Brewing Company. This is flavor
Jay,
of the
you've
day
got
IPA. I can't say.
You've got to get beer without alliteration because
Mountain
you've struggled. The amount of times you've screwed up Moat Mountain.
Last week was the dress rehearsal.
It's a
and it didn't take.
Say Moat Mountain like 5 times fast.
Moat Mountain, Moat Mountain, Moat Mountain, Moat Mountain, Moat.
And Josh is gone.
And see, I told you he couldn't say it.
Oh, that's what you get for saying. You try to say it 5 times, it shuts down your live feed.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens, Andrew. Andrew, what are you drinking tonight?
All right, I've got, here's some more alliteration. Buttonwoods Brewery. Yes, the place that hosted Oktoberfest where Ghost in the Snow played a couple weeks ago. I've got one of their brews. Commit This to Memory. It's a raw IPA, and I like to think it is inspired by the Motion City soundtrack album of the same name. So
that sounds terrific.
It is.
Well, that's great. What am I drinking, you ask? Well, an Aperol Spritz, as always, as I hold it above my face. Not used to a visual medium. As you may have noticed, if you're tuned in right now, we're doing a live stream again. It's our second one. Last week went so well that we decided, hey, let's come back for more. So here we are with another live show of the Brothers of Dynasty. We should also tell you that the Brothers of Dynasty is a part of the Fantasy Football Collective network of podcasts. You can find the Fantasy Football Collective at FF_collective. That's KOLLECTIV on Twitter for other great content and podcasts like the Fantasy Nightcap, the Fantasy Boardroom, and Collective Knowledge, which Collective Knowledge will be live streaming right after we finish up at 9:30. Correct, Jay? That's when they're going up with their live stream?
Yep, that is when they're going up. 9:30, and the Fantasy Nightcap is going on at 10. I think it's just wall-to-wall
fantasy content tonight. It's your marathon shows.
Watch Twitter and YouTube and watch us talk about football.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way to go.
I hope you didn't plan on sleeping tonight because it's all football.
All right, we should move into some football talk. So we're going to do our normal storyline mock draft. So we're going to do 12 picks rotating through Andrew, then me, then Andrew, then Jay, then me of the biggest storylines of the week. Starting with Andrew with the 101. Andrew, what's your first pick for storylines this week?
My first topic will be about Patrick Mahomes. Do we reset expectations, or is everything good?
Did you drop him?
I think the answer is he droppable.
Is Patrick Mahomes droppable? That's
No, wait. That was my CEH topic. Never mind. Mahomes.
Cold.
No, as far as things are concerned with fantasy, I think Mahomes is always going to be that all-star for you. You drafted him most likely for the past few years as the number 1 quarterback overall because he's that good and he's that safe. And even on a week like this last one where he had 2 interceptions, 1 fumble, didn't crack 300 yards, though still getting 272 yards is pretty great for fantasy. He still pulls off nearly 20 points. Like, a bad week for him is still around 20 points. Like, he's just not a guy who messes up for you. You don't get like these Jared Goff 4-point weeks from him, which again just continues to make him that reliable quarterback 1 for you. With Patrick Mahomes, I'd maybe be a little more worried as a Kansas City Chiefs fan. You just see tough teams like the Bills, the Cowboys look great. I mean, we could go on about more real life football. So them being at 2-3, I'd be worried about that team and have some of the other teams that are coming up, the Chargers and stuff. Like, have they figured out the Chiefs enough that sort of kicks them off of that favorite for the Super Bowl. But as far as fantasy is concerned, I just still think Mahomes is a stud, as if there was any sort of doubt in there. But I feel like it still goes without saying that even on his worst week, he's still really good.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much. I mean, obviously we're a Dynasty podcast. I don't think it's so much of a question of whether Mahomes is at the top tier of fantasy football. I think the question is, have people joined him in that top tier? And I think Josh Allen being the number one name to a lesser extent. I mean, Herbert and Kyler and Dak are the other three that I would consider possibly. But I think this comment's really more about Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen, you might put in that same tier as Patrick Mahomes at this point, because he's been terrific. He's an MVP candidate. I mean, I understand that Mahomes has done it for longer, but for fantasy purposes, I think it's no longer a tier of one at the top. And it's less about Mahomes and more about the other quarterbacks coming up behind him.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. You have all the quarterbacks on all those teams that I mentioned that are up and coming, and you take someone like Patrick Mahomes. I think Jay made the point too with his floor that it's like you could pick him knowing he's going to be a top 3 quarterback for you. The resetting expectations is it more safe to say it's like, well, he'll be a top 7 quarterback for you, because there's just that many fantasy stud quarterbacks that a guarantee of top 3 is just not in the cards for anyone, because there's a little more parity there.
Yeah, and you look at Lamar last night. I mean, another huge fantasy player. Herbert up there. Now you have just so many guys entering the conversation. The thing that helps him is that defense is so bad that they're going to have to throw, like, for this year, if we're taking
reason we used
Dynasty
to get
out of
Dak Prescott.
I think that's what helps him gets to his floor. This week, he had to throw the ball 54 times because they're playing from behind, and that defense is probably going to put them down in some games this year. And the offensive line isn't great. That's probably what hurts him the most and what separates him a little. He's mobile enough, but he's not quite at the level of the Josh Allen's and Lamar's, where that offensive line breaking down might affect him a little bit more, although he could still scramble and do some crazy throws. He's throwing a little bit more picks on those this year in some spots. So that's kind of catching up with him. Some of that hero ball where he's completed some amazing passes, but he's also, those are kind of 50-50 balls where sometimes they're going to end up as interceptions. So that's hurt him a little, but yeah, I think the point is correct of like other guys are making it a clustered pack of multiple quarterbacks at the top that are a little bit interchangeable.
Yeah, I mean, the 6 interceptions on the season is the thing that kind of sticks out to you as a little bit of a worry point with him, as if that interception turnover ratio goes up for him. It obviously that cuts into your points. That just takes him down just a little bit. But at the same point, I believe he's still QB2 on the season for what has been probably the roughest 5-game stretch of his career. So, I mean, going back to your original point, Andrew, there's such a safe floor with him. It just kind of reinforces that even at his worst, he's still better than 95% of the league, with very few exceptions. But let's move on to our next topic at the 102, and that's to you, Jay.
Yeah, 102. I want to go with the guy who's the fantasy MVP through 5 games so far, Derrick Henry. I have some larger thoughts on Derrick Henry so far. He's at a kind of a rare point in regular PPR scoring right now. He's at number 1 player in fantasy, which doesn't happen all the time because quarterbacks tend to be number 1 because they are generally the highest scoring position. Running backs score a lot, but usually you see a quarterback at the top at least. Derrick Henry is number 1. His low week on the year, he had a 10-week one, but then has had 47, 19, 25, 31. It's just crushed it, is getting, 29, 30, 35 carries a game. But so we know he's a superstar. My larger point here is how we view him in Dynasty football. He's 27. We've talked about the volume of carries he's gotten. I think maybe we keep talking about eventually this is going to catch up. Eventually this is going to catch up. What if it doesn't? I think he's just different. And why does it have to catch up with him? The guy's huge. He's 6'3". He doesn't ever really seem to get even injury, dinged up.
Yeah.
You've got guys like Dalvin Cook who are like, he plays through it. He's awesome, but he's always kind of limping off the field. Like there's always something. He's missed 2 games this year, just as his example, but that's common throughout running backs. He just seems like he's a different breed, and he's only 27. You compare him to other just age-wise. We're just taking age. Eckler, Cook, Zeke, and Kamara are all 27 next year. Henry will be 28. Only 1 year difference.
Yeah.
CMC 26, Chubb 26 as well. So we're not talking like gigantic gaps until you're talking about like Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift, who are the next up and comers who need to obviously produce at a high level for a little bit longer before you're probably putting them at maybe 101 of running back for Dynasty. Also, his receptions have ticked up this year. He's almost matched like his total receptions from like all last season. So that's huge too.
Yeah. 14 on the year.
Why shouldn't he be like top 3 or even in the discussion for like, yeah, if I was doing a startup right now, why not just take him 1? His value's huge. He's a league winner too. He's like a difference maker in terms of if you're trying to win a championship, which not everybody's like that. Like Antonio Gibson's not at that level yet. He could be. And I know you have to project in Dynasty, but these running backs just, I think I was even in the mindset of being a little too low where I'm like readjusting specifically for him. Why am I taking into these factors that don't seem to be affecting him at all? And to just compare him to one player before I throw it to you guys, Adrian Peterson, if you want to look at him, obviously a different breed of a running back too, but if you go to his 28-year-old season, his 30-year-old season, and his 33-year-old season, those seasons are huge. They're all 250 plus, and in 2 of those seasons, the 28 and 30-year-old, he's pushing 348 and 327 carries. So we're talking huge workload. He's getting 1,400 yards in those years, 1,200 yards.
Yeah.
He didn't fall off when he hit 28. Those are all 28 plus seasons.
Yeah.
He obviously had some weird stuff in between where he had some rest for various reasons, but injury and un-injury related. But why can't Henry, continue to produce for a few more years at a large clip where he should be in the discussion for top running back?
Yeah, and Derrick Henry was largely unused for his first 2 years in the league, so there isn't as much tread on the tires for his age as you may think. And again, like Adrian Peterson, you made the note earlier, it's like we don't compare people to Adrian Peterson because it's Adrian Peterson, but I feel like unless they're Derrick Henry, you know what I mean? Because I think he's established himself. He's going to lead the league in rushing, barring, an injury this year.
Which
he's 100 He's over 100 yards ahead of the next closest person in yards already on the season. So, like, if all things stay the course, he's going to lead the league in rushing for a 3rd straight year, I believe. He's different. He's rushed for over 2,000 yards, and you watch him run. And he's kind of like, you talk about the things that limit guys. Like, he's fast, but he's not. Speed isn't what makes him what he is. He just has so many tools. Like, he reminds me a little bit of like Kevin Durant in the NBA, where it's like, this is going to age well because of this specific level of talent, where even if he did get injured, I really wouldn't doubt that he would come back and still be effective.
Yeah, no, I think he's got the durability and to go along with all the skill that you've already mentioned. And I completely agree with the take that it seems like a bad idea to compare someone to the outlier, but that's until they become the outlier themselves. It's just, we see that with every successful year from Derrick Henry, he more puts himself into that category. So while you want to start counting him out due to age, he's also fitting himself into that outlier category. So you sort of have that like conundrum when you're trying to evaluate based on just one factor. I think that's not the whole story, and why he's different and you can't use that same lens for him. And also, I what's the other point that I want to make on just
we're live, Andrew, we're live. Get it out.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Yeah, start yelling.
Take as much time as you want.
Yeah, we'll edit this out in post.
No, it's called taking strategic pauses while you collect your thoughts. So for running backs in general, I think I've been trying to make the point since the offseason that I'm really not viewing them on like the same dynasty type evaluation that a lot of other people tend to. It seems like as soon as someone's like a few years older, once they're hitting the end of their rookie contract, people want to cut bait with them. But I really reduced my running back evaluations. It's like, are they a stud most likely for this year with the option to extend? I'm really looking almost at like a 1.5 year type evaluation. And Derrick Henry met that mark for me perfectly in the offseason. And I just think it's a different field. It's shorter windows for that position. And to kind of hold them against the ideas of what we, subconsciously put against wide receivers and even quarterbacks and go into that dynasty mentality, you're always planning against running backs. And I don't think that's fair. I think you have to think differently.
Well, I mean, because even at a young age, there's obviously it's a position that has more injuries. There's any number of mitigating factors where you don't necessarily need to factor in age to the same extent, where age sometimes gets overrated and other ways gets underrated. It's really kind of the flaw in fantasy rankings, overall dynasty fantasy rankings, because it really depends on what your approach is at a startup, within a season, within a league, where you are. Like, if you are drafting to try to win now, obviously, like, you're going to be drafting more contending players, and Derrick Henry fits that bill. There's a rare group of people who I think fits the bill of being all around universally useful in fantasy, where they are young enough, they are talented enough, and they are producing enough right away. Justin Jefferson is a guy who strikes me as fitting that bill. Justin Jefferson is really high in fantasy because he's also really high in redraft. His redraft ranking and his dynasty ranking are near parity. At running back, that's harder to find. So,
Swift and Taylor, I think, are the closest. I think
Swift and Taylor probably the closest. I would have said Gibson before this year, although that's been kind of an adventure. I don't really know there. At Swift running back, Taylor, other than that,
22. So they're
Najee,
but Najee. Well, he's like 25, right? So, no.
But also, if we're thinking preseason, because I know we've had Gibson's had a few of his problems, but at least before the season started, there might have been a little bit more correlation.
Yeah, I think particularly Swift's probably earning it maybe the most. Taylor had a big game last night, though. He just still weird usage there, but it's just Henry. It's just like and I've fallen into this trap too, and it's going to be case by case. It's like you gotta be nuanced with how you're evaluating various running backs as they age. But I think like when you're sleeping on him in startups, you're kind of like really hurting yourself in terms of championships early on, because I guarantee you most teams that have him are in contention with Henry unless they really screwed up elsewhere. They are. Yeah. I look across all the leagues, and if you have Henry, you are been good last year and the previous year, and you are solid this year as well. So you're hurting yourself in terms of trying to win. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's also something where, I mean, let's not forget that like there are like transitive values to player. If you entered a startup being like, oh, I want to get young, I want to have a team that's going to build towards the future, I'm going to necessarily punt on this year. But if Derrick Henry falls to a place where Derrick Henry shouldn't fall, take Derrick Henry and then flip him. If you end up maybe you compete because you drafted like Jamar Chase and you drafted other players who are making you compete Patterson. Now. Cordarrelle Patterson, these young studs. But like you find yourself in a way that your team's better than you thought drafting your team, and then you have Derrick Henry, which is great. Or maybe you're not. You're still young. You're not there yet. And then you have Derrick Henry to move, who someone's going to give you a haul for. Or you just hold on to him because he's probably going to be good next year too, and maybe you're competing then. It just keeps like you're not losing roster flexibility with Derrick Henry the way you would be with like a guy. I don't know. I don't know what other guy would lose roster flexibility. Just be more creative about your fantasy
Miles
assets.
Sanders? I don't know.
Well, yeah, Miles Sanders is moving out of the way. We should move on. That's a lot of Derrick Henry. I want to move on to, and I just mentioned him, I want to move on to Jamar Chase. And this is coming preseason and in the offseason. I was consistent on ranking Devontae Smith above Jamar Chase. This is not an anti-Devontae Smith thing. Devontae Smith has been great. But guys, I was wrong. Jamar Chase.
What's it do to BMI? No, I'm just kidding.
No. This literally has nothing. I mean, Devontae Smith has been terrific this season. I think if you have Devontae Smith, you're great. But Jamar Chase has been outstanding. And I think there was every reason to think that he would get to a point where he'd be terrific and be that wide receiver one. But I don't think anyone should have realistically expected it this soon, given that he had been a year out of competitive football after opting out. He had a rough time in the preseason. And also, like, the things that, like, he only really had, like, he was very young. He really had, like, 1 year of production. Like, his biggest struggle on tape was separation, although, like, the physical attributes that he had all over the place were terrific. The fact that he's doing this much this quickly, 456 yards, 5 touchdowns, is absurd. And, like, this is a stat that I got from Next Gen Stats that's just absolutely ridiculous. He's accounting for 47% of his team's air yards. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely absurd. So he's getting thrown to a lot and down the field. I believe that 4 of his touchdowns are 30-plus yard receptions. If I'm not mistaken, it's at least 3. And the last 2 games, he's racked up 19 targets. So even like the target floor is coming along. I did not expect this to come this fast for Jamar Chase, but the fact that it has, like, you gotta just give it up for Jamar Chase and to that LSU program for producing Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase in back-to-back years. That's absurd.
Yeah, wow. 2 of the best young receivers.
What is happening in the Bayou?
Yeah, that's a wide receiver school. I mean, you go Odell back. I mean, you know,
Jarvis Landry, Sterling Shepard, to a lesser extent.
There's a good line of receivers from there. He's second most targets over 20 yards to your point. 6 receptions, which is the most, and for 4 TDs. So just the long game, he is the leader of the league. He's actually, I posted this today on Twitter. He has the lowest floor week of the season. His lowest week this year is 13.4 in PPR.
So he has so he has the highest floor and a very high ceiling to boot.
Yeah, and they all have 25% target share on that team. So they're it's going to those 3 guys, and so he's established himself as getting plenty of target share there. And my thought is like, where do you put him in Dynasty if you're, once again, the rankings wise? Does he already top 10? Is 10? I mean, for Dynasty receivers.
Game.
Do we want to do a name game? Can I bring up a Dynasty ranking real quick? Yeah. I mean, I can probably go through it pretty much off the top of my head real quick. It's obviously Tyreek Hill, you're staying above him. Devontae Adams. Jefferson has to be above him.
I mean, I guess you don't. I mean, if you really love Chase,
yeah, that's true. I think you might be able to put him above there. Jefferson's a good one. This is probably an easy get. Terry McLaurin. Do you put Terry McLaurin above or below?
I'd probably put Chase above.
Yeah. I think I'd put Chase above too.
I think that was probably the more fair place to start in that McLaurin, DJ Moore.
It's just like, is it too much too soon? I mean, it's 5 weeks, so it's a little crazy, but it's like, I think like if you're doing a startup right now and like you're on the clock and like it's like,
I don't mind going Chase though. Like, I mean,
rookie. I don't know. You know, I think I'm taking him over McLaurin and Stephon Diggs, even probably, who's a little bit older. I think I'm probably around the 8 range.
Yeah, Stephon Diggs is probably there. CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, it's close. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen how, whether it's just the defense playing better in Dallas and cutting down maybe some of that upside in the offense, and also that there's just so many mouths to feed. I mean, we're thinking there's a lot of mouths to feed in Cincinnati as well, but I think Dallas kind of takes the cake there with it kind of getting spread around. So I don't know. Maybe I do feel like Chase can command more of a target share on a consistent basis than CeeDee Lamb, and maybe that upside is enough to say I go 50% one way and the other. And like, on a given day, you could argue.
So I love there. Tier right around CD probably.
It's definitely a tier.
He's on the way up though. It's not like it can't go up further if it continues. Like every week it continues. It's like okay, it becomes like Jefferson, where it's like you have no problem after 1 year being like okay, he's 101 in wide receivers because he's 22 barely.
Yeah, and it's
you can kind of do that a little bit more with wide receiver, where you have your cake and eat it too, where you're like you could go young, I feel like, and also have the production a little bit more there,
especially at this point, because I feel like we're getting to a point. I mean, I think some of the older guys will start to peak off and trail off a little bit, but it's a very deep wide receiver class, and Jamar Chase is one of those. And it's also like, it's not like this is a surprise with Jamar Chase. Like, he was obviously like a super high pet. Like, this was probably the best wide receiver class, particularly on the top end, that we've had in some time. Like, probably going back to like 2014 when it was OBJ, Mike Evans, that group, and then the Julio Jones, AJ Green group before that, between particularly Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase, who were super high pedigree guys, Jalen Waddle, and they're to a slight lesser extent, and then the depth as well, as we've seen kind of work out with Rondale Moore being quite good. Who else has been good? There's been another wide receiver who that's been good. That's been a rookie. Kadarius Toney, who we'll get to in a little bit. I'm sure it has really been breaking out. But let's move on to our next storyline, and that goes to you, Andrew, at the 104.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Josh Jacobs, who's been underwhelming. Might be an overstatement, but kind of good weekend this last week. But more. I'm not going to go. I don't think we're going to.
Yeah, let me just preface this real quick. Obviously, John Gruden resigned as the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. We are a fantasy podcast. We are not delving into the news specifically about John Gruden, except to say that just a note out there to all fantasy individuals out there covering this and people watching it. This is not cancel culture. This is not a witch hunt. This is someone facing repercussions for their actions over a number of years in a league that should be trying to be more inclusive and equitable with its workforce. So that's all we'll say about it. So let's move on to the fantasy implications, and back to you, Andrew, on Josh Jacobs.
Yeah. So our take for the past few years, I don't think any of us were crazy about Jacobs, but the thing that we liked him enough where he should be one of those guys that was like maybe had the upside of a back end RB1 if he got the opportunity, maybe a strong RB2, but the knock on him these past few years has just been the poor usage. And I think a lot of that stemmed from John Gruden and a very uninspired, limited use of a guy like Josh Jacobs. I don't think he got sufficient goal line where he certainly wasn't getting any receptions, and probably the play calling for the run game in general was just not working out. And my thought is it sort of poses the question, is he now a buy low candidate? We know he can do it. We've seen him flash great games when he gets involved properly. I know that the loss of John Gruden doesn't also remove guys like Peyton Barber and Kenyan Drake from the equation. It's still sort of that weirdly crowded backfield with some money tied up into it. But can the removal of Gruden and the introduction of maybe someone who wants to get the run game more creative, wants to get Josh Jacobs, the guy who should be the top dog in that backfield, get him more involved, give him better play calling that suits his talent? Can he make a jump back into more of that top 20, top 15 running back conversation? And it's open-ended enough where the answer is, of course, yes. Like, anything seems like it would be an improvement upon him. And we've seen when talented professional running backs like a James Robinson get the opportunity and someone the team decides to lean on them. That can happen for Josh Jacobs given the right usage. And we'll just have to see how things shake up. It's probably a unsatisfying way to end that. But I sort of end up hopeful on Josh Jacobs because I know we expected better from him coming out in 2019, and it'd be nice to see an upturn for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think Josh Jacobs is certainly a buy low candidate. I mean, I think they've got money tied up in Kenyan Drake, but he really hasn't gotten that much usage. I think this Peyton Barber nonsense will be knocked out real quick with Josh Jacobs healthy. They just
Barber
need someone
this week, so that helped.
Barber was hurt this week, so that's not really an issue as it is. But like, kind of like, there's this old school mentality in a number of ways, obviously, with John Gruden that was brought in about kind of like guys like Peyton Barber. Like, there's just no lack of talent with Josh Jacobs, and there was no reason why he should have been ceding carries to Peyton Barber, which is not a good way to run an offense. It was ultimately the problem with people like John Gruden from a coaching perspective, a game scheme perspective in the league. Whereas I think if they get a more new school coach in there, if they got someone like Kellen Moore from Dallas to be the coach there, or Byron Leftwich from Tampa Bay, I think you'd see a much more modern offense that would be more consistent and more sustainable. Because it's not like that offense wasn't good for the first few weeks, but as we've seen the past few years, they were figured out. And so I think using the talent that's on that team in a better way will serve Josh Jacobs, particularly his fantasy value, more. And I also think it's going to be a more consistent tide for that offense as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And the Kenyan Drake suddenly had like 12 snaps this week, so that was good because that was just like from a team roster building perspective, like a really redundant signing. It was just like him and Josh Jacobs really kind of run into each other in terms of what they do well. I know Kenyan Drake can catch it a little maybe better, but like Josh Jacobs can catch the ball. So it was just really kind of redundant there.
Yeah.
Obviously they're running a football team there, but I just think, to your point, Gruden's style was old school. It wasn't a modern offense. So I would say him out of town could only help. I mean, it probably can't get worse necessarily for Jacobs in terms of his usage. So I think he could be a benefactor in terms of anything new that comes to that team in terms of an offensive perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our next storyline, and let's go to you, Jay. 105.
Mine is a player that I have come around on. I was not a big Hollywood Brown guy before, but man, when I looked into it more and started getting some of the stats, I'm in. From last week, from week 12 on, he's had a stretch over those games where he's scored 11 touchdowns and has had 54 receptions and 789 yards. That's 11 games, 11 touchdowns, which is wild for a guy that I don't even know if we think about him. No, that's not the first thing that pops to my head. I think speedster, small receiver, shifty in space. I don't think, touchdown machine Hollywood Brown. That's not really what jumps out, but that's what he's doing, and he's doing it this year as well. He's only scored, only had one game under 10 PPR, 10 points in PPR in that stretch. So he's been consistent. And that was coming off a stretch where he had 5 games in a row under 10 points in PPR. He was basically, I think we did it on our show last year where he was left for dead. We were just like, you just can't play him. Like, I mean, he's done. And then all of a sudden he turned it around. And it hasn't stopped. And last night, obviously, huge night for everybody on the Ravens, from Lamar to Hollywood to Mark Andrews, just gigantic games. And I don't see this changing really for Hollywood Brown. We have the reasons why I was still kind of down on him this year was they brought in Bateman. We knew that running game was good. They didn't pass the ball that much, even though they said they wanted to do that more. But the way things have gone this year have all led to just a completely kind of different recipe. That run game is terrible. They've obviously had injuries there.
Outside of Lamar, obviously.
Well, yeah, not counting Lamar, they basically don't have a reasonable running game really whatsoever. So they're actually they are actually passing more because they kind of have to. Their defense isn't quite as good as it used to be. It's okay, but it's giving up points. You could score on that team, and they're having to throw it more. He has 25% target share, and Andrews has 24, and Watkins had 19. Watkins has a hamstring injury. You bring Bateman in. Bateman could just take that 19 And basically, Hollywood could still get 25. I mean, that's not how exactly it can go, but there is plenty to go around based on how they've played so far this year for Hollywood to continue in the future. And he's just a huge play waiting to happen. He has, one of the other, we talked about Chase in terms of long, over 20-yard receptions and things like that. He's right there with him.
Yeah.
Long touchdowns. We saw another one last night. If he didn't have those drops in the Detroit game a couple of weeks ago, he'd probably have 1 to 2 more long touchdowns. So he's been fantastic. I don't know how else to put it. I was too low on him. He's a guy that I actually think, if I'm thinking about buying or selling or holding, I think he's a buy, because I actually think he's still a little sneaky in terms of if people are coming around on him. If you had the thought, if you were out on him before, I actually think he's a guy. Maybe the price is okay. I
think I agree with that.
And he's still young. He's this third-year guy and who has first-round draft capital too. So
yeah.
I think I was just too low on him. He is a playmaker, and I think it can continue and he can coexist with Andrews and Bateman.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, just to pose this to you, obviously, a lot of this growth is due to his touchdown production. We've talked about touchdowns being a little flukier, but obviously we have a pretty wide sample size at this point from last year to this year. But he's 23rd in targets in the league. He's 18th in receptions, yet he's number 6 wide receiver overall. Some of those numbers would suggest that there is a regression coming, because a lot of that is buoyed by touchdowns. But do you think the touchdowns is sustainable enough to be a regular part of his game and really buoy him to punch above his weight necessarily in terms of targets and receptions?
At least for the rest of this year, I don't see how it goes, how it's not. He's scoring in 2 ways too. If you saw the game-winning touchdown last night, that's a 7-yard within the 10, gets open and kind of outworks a guy near the goal line, and then he scores like a 50-yarder earlier in the game it's not like he's doing it one way. He's actually impressing me because he's doing it multiple ways, and his target share is high enough in terms of getting. I mean, he had 10 targets last night. Obviously, that's an overtime game, so he's getting like a decent amount of targets too. So I think it's sustainable enough. Maybe he doesn't finish 6, but like wide receiver is just like, if you could be top 20 wide receiver, you're still very productive, because just look at the top 20 right now. You're gonna like a lot of the guys in that list. So I think he's going to live there and be a solid performer for you going forward. He's probably not going to score a touchdown every game. No one does, but I don't think he goes touchdownless the rest of the year. That's for sure, because I think he can get it done in multiple ways.
Yeah, I want to go to a listener question here right now, and reminder to everyone who's watching right now, drop your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to them. We'll put them up on the screen here. So Barson the Tuck asks, left field question of the week. My league, full PPR, gives points for return yards. Should I pick up Jamal Agnew since he's getting targets now? Plus the Jags D to double up if he gets a return touchdown. So this is, I mean, I guess it depends on how deep your league is, but going into bye weeks, Jamal Agnew has proved to be pretty explosive on those returns, so it's probably not a bad pickup.
If you get return yards, yeah. I don't know what's he get? How many full PPR gives points for? I'm not sure what the points are, but like that's obviously most of Jamal Agnew's game is, and now he's getting a little bit with DJ Chark out there. So
yeah,
not bad. It's tough to gauge it without knowing how many points he'd get, but certainly that he is very explosive in that area where he's returned the one from that was on the missed kick. He returned that all the way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he's explosive in that game. I guess it really depends on who you're dropping and how deep your league is. I mean, obviously, I think his only real values as a streaming option over bye weeks. I because of how deep wide receiver is. But if you're dropping someone that is, if you have to drop a guy who, I'm like trying to think of a name, if you have to drop like a Jamal Williams to get him, I'm keeping Jamal Williams.
Would you drop LaVisca Chenault for
Absolutely not.
I mean, Jamal Agnew had 7 targets last week to Chenault's 3. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Let's move on to our next topic, which is going to me, and I'm going to talk about Russ the Lionheart. I don't know if you guys saw that stupid Twitter post. You got surgery on your finger, Mr. Unlimited. Settle down. He's out 48 weeks with it's a ruptured tendon, aka mallet finger is the kind of colloquial term for it. There was also a fracture on the lower joint there as well on his throwing hand. So he's out 4 to 8 weeks. I'm sure he's going to say he's going to be back in 4 weeks. From what I hear, it's probably likely to be closer to 8 weeks from there, which is obviously a huge blow to a lot of fantasy teams out there, particularly in Superflex. But Geno Smith came in and operated that offense decently. So I guess the question I want to pose to the two of you is, in a Superflex league, are you trying to get Geno Smith at all costs if you're a Russ owner, or even if you're not, if you just need help at QB through the bye weeks? Is that a big buy, or are you kind of meh on picking him up?
I'd say I'm meh. I wasn't. He got the job done, I guess, and he's got some good weapons around him. So I think he can probably put in an okay performance fantasy-wise, but I also don't know that that's going to be better than maybe my third quarterback. Because if we're thinking super flex, you can always use another quarterback. So, yeah, he might be worth throwing fab dollars at, because that's, and again, based on the last question we were answering from the comments, it's always based on what the bottom of your bench looks like. Do you have the room to roster a guy who's a rental? I just hope that I have 3 quarterbacks that are better than him to begin with and don't have to spend that money and can use it elsewhere. But if you're strapped, then I'd say, of course, it's very situational. But hopefully you have the quarterback depth to take on an injury like that without having to dip to the waiver wire.
Yeah, if I don't have a I'm going pretty hard at Geno, actually. If I don't have, if I'm a Russ, if I have Russ on my team, I just lost him, and I have, I don't know, say, Tyrod was your third quarterback, or Jimmy G, or Mac Jones. I'm going pretty out because I just think he offers the range of outcomes for him are pretty wide, but he offers an upside that is higher than probably Mac Jones at this point of Mac Jones' career, if you want to compare him to him. Just because he can move a little bit, he can rush. We've seen him do that before, and he actually has probably more weapons than he's ever had in his career. You have Metcalf and Lockett. That's not bad in terms of, I wouldn't have high expectations. I wouldn't be like, I'm going to ride Geno to the championship or anything like that. But I think you're in a little bit of desperation mode when this is what happens during the year where you got to go, so I'm probably spending a good amount of fab, especially if I had Wilson and I just lost him, just because there's just how many other backups that you're waiting for someone to come along. It's not going to happen, or you're going to have to work a trade. So I think you got to look up Geno a little bit.
Yeah, I think obviously most value if you have Russ and you're trying to replace him, because that's just going to be, that's a tough one. He's likely your QB1, so you want to get some facsimile of that it's going to be hard to get elsewhere. But let's move on to our next topic at the 107. Andrew.
Oh, it's Kadarius Toney all day.
And I
love that I feel way more justified talking about him this week. Not going to get any pushback on this performance, because last week, obviously, it was the 6 for 78. It was good. It was nice to see. But this week was sort of an undeniable 10 receptions on 13 targets for 189 yards. And I truly believe he would have cracked that 200-yard line if he didn't get ejected from the game. That was just...
it's true. He did punch someone in the face.
Yeah, which I feel like is just the most foolish thing you can do, taking your hand and punching A helmet.
A hard helmet.
I want the numbers on how many players of whatever have hurt or broken their hands in throwing a sucker punch.
Yeah, I don't know.
Designed to stop concussions and break hands.
Either PFF Next Gen Stats or Football Outsiders. Can you get on that? Get that data to Andrew.
Yeah, no, I want those. Yeah, I want those advanced stats on helmet punches. But no, this is good, and it's nice to see that the Giants are using him and getting him more involved. This is the second week in a row with a number of inactives from some of those same players. And I think Kenny Golladay also got banged up.
He left with a knee injury. No Slayton, no Shepard. Obviously, Saquon went down as well.
Tony hurt his ankle.
I was going to say, in fairness, Tony also injured his ankle. But I feel like he came back into the game after that. After he headbutted one of the guys attending to him on the sideline. It was the weirdest thing. He was just like flipping out and like stood up really fast.
He's a passionate guy. I'm into it.
Yeah, no, I like, he's got the fire. But this week was one of those. Last week was an introduction. This week was a statement game for the first round pick, Kadarius Toney. And I think he did enough, and they showed that they were behind getting him involved enough that I think even when some of these guys that were inactive come back, he's made his presence known, and I can see him going on to maybe supplant one or both of the Shepard Slaytons that were out before. I think he's sort of establishing himself. I think they like to, and you see that explosiveness, you see the dynamic work from him. And I think a team like the Giants is going to want to lean on that guy moving forward. And I'd just like to say, even though I picked him as my rookie bust of the year, I think the mere fact I was even bringing him up preseason when some people, I think, were completely overlooking him. I think even if I brought him up in a negative light, I was the highest on him. I like to think that. And
he was some pretty bad juju over the summer. I mean, it was bad reports, injuries, COVID, all sorts of things. He was going to be brought along slowly. But I mean, it's also like in a circumstance that this was a situation where it was like, okay, kid, here's your test. We're going in. We're behind. We're against the Cowboys. We're going to have to play a bit street ball style. Like we know that he's just a freak of an athlete, super talented on that end. Not necessarily a route runner. I think he's just making shapes out there.
He doesn't know what a route is.
But he gets open. And he's got good hands. And he just makes guys miss. And that's always what showed up on his tape. I mean, I think the situation with everyone being injured and him getting the opportunity was great, and he showed a lot. And obviously, I think he's earned snaps on that team going forward. But my biggest question is not necessarily about Kadarius Toney anymore. It's just ultimately about that situation in that team, particularly with Daniel Jones got a concussion as well. It's a very strange thing. It was a very strange game. I'm just like, I think Kadarius Toney's good. I think I'm holding off another week or two putting him in my lineup to see what he does. He needs to repeat it one more time for me to trust it completely.
I'd say in a perfect world, but we're going into bye weeks, so maybe you feel.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously he's an upside play streaming option for sure. But like locking down that wide, you're like week in and week out starting wide receiver 3. I just want because it was kind of a unique situation of that game that I just want to see it in again. I just want to see it again in a more traditional circumstance to see that's repeatable. Well, let's move on to our next storyline at the 108. Jay.
My storyline on the flip side is AJ Brown so far. My thoughts on him are basically, should we have short-term concern? Any long-term concern?
I think you broke up a little bit there, Jay, so I just want to restate in case that was just on my end or outside. Talking about A.J. Brown, correct?
Yeah, A.J. Brown. It's basically, are we concerned? How concerned are we about it? He's currently wide receiver 79 on the year. He is coming off kind of multiple injuries. There was a little bit of lingering stuff preseason coming into the year. Then we enter into the season, and he pulls a hamstring. This game last week was a weird one, so still not an underwhelming performance there, but he was clearly kind of on a snap count. He only played 64% of the snap share as opposed to where he's usually getting in the 80s in terms of how much he's out there. But really on the whole this year, this team hasn't really been in sync. You can kind of bring Ryan Tannehill into this discussion too, who has been pretty underwhelming as well. A guy who was around, a fringe QB1, for 1 QB leagues on the year, but hasn't really thrown the ball quite as much. Hasn't thrown a ton of touchdowns, has been pretty inconsistent. So it's kind of twofold there. But for me, my take on AJ Brown before I get you guys' input is, I think I'm a little bit concerned the next few weeks, but I think he rights the ship and things start to turn. I think he's still super talented. I think it's more something's up between him and Tannehill been off. The targets have been there. They just haven't been in sync. It's probably on both of them. So I think as the year progresses and maybe in some games where they have to actually throw the ball more, which they really haven't had to do because they can lean on Henry so much, maybe you see some brighter days there, but I still think long-term he's fine. He's still in that upper echelon of wide receivers in Dynasty, but it hasn't been good so far. If you chose him in redrafts or if you were looking for a big season from him in Dynasty team, not good. He's probably losing you weeks.
Yeah, he's been brutal this year. There's really no other way to say it. Obviously, he missed a game. He was out there this past week. He's got 25 targets, which is not terrible, but it's like 6 a game. You'd rather see him getting 8 to 10 at least a game, which is where he was last year. And he's only got 10 catches on that. So he's like, what is that? Like under 40% catch rate? Yep. There's something bad. And like you mentioned a little bit, it just go back to Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Tannehill's regressed against all stats on his team, and you think that would have changed. He's had Julio, he's had AJ Brown. Obviously, the running game opens things up for him, but he's just been really off. And he's also been, and I know both of those guys have been banged up a little bit and missed some games, but like he's in the this is just going into some analytics here. He's in the bottom 10 among qualified QBs in completion percentage relative to expected completion percentage. So he's not completing passes he should. He's throwing into tight windows 19% of the time. So guys aren't getting open. So there's a huge issue there with the passing game, and it's being buoyed to Mike's point here in the comments. Obviously, it's not just that Derrick Henry's doing great. They don't have to throw, but they're trying to throw, and it's not working. That's the issue. Derrick Henry's keeping them afloat. They're winning despite the passing game at this point. And it's just something's disconnecting. Obviously, Arthur Smith moved on, their offensive coordinator, so maybe there's some upset in that sort of play calling and the scheming on that end. Your guys just aren't quite right. I'm not sure what it is. I still believe in the talent of AJ Brown, but there's concern there for me beyond the short term about this offense. Not I think they get it righted eventually, but maybe not this year. That's the thing.
Yeah, the key game coming up is Chiefs 2 weeks from now. That's the one where that's the bar. That's the test.
Yeah, AJ Brown's gonna eat in that game.
So it's to tell if they're getting healthy or not. It's that's the one. If you can pass that test, then maybe there's some more hope. But
you hope, but even in a shootout, you could be leaning on Derrick Henry.
I know, but that's
even if they're playing from behind. I don't think they abandoned. I don't think
noted passing down back Derrick Henry as he's been this year. Apparently, he's been eaten in the passing game. It's concerning though. Definitely in the short term, I'm just concerned about Tennessee's passing game this year in general. I think they'll get it righted though for AJ Brown and Dynasty going forward. Moving on to the 109, which is me. I'm gonna talk about Robert Woods on Thursday Night Football. Robert Woods had 12 catches for 150 yards. It was, I think I tweeted this out. He nearly doubled his yardage and reception totals on the year in one game. I don't know. Like, there was obviously, like, it was weird. He wasn't getting a lot of targets. There was some, like, rumors that he was unhappy with his target share, but hey, that changed in this last game, and he was terrific. They went to him early. They went to him often. And Cooper Kupp still got his in the game as well. So it wasn't like Cooper Kupp was at the expense of Cooper Kupp. So I guess the question, and I guess I'm still worried about this, is like, how sustainable is this going forward? Was this just kind of was this a get right game for Robert Woods, or was this an outlier? I guess I'm putting him back in my starting lineup this week because you have to, because it's Robert Woods and he had a great game last week, but I'm just afraid to get burned again.
I think luckily for me, in a few places, I hadn't yet removed him from my wide receivers just because, I don't know, sometimes the situation dictates that you don't really have a better option. So
yeah, he was one I was still hanging on hope. I think I was doing some start-sit questions 2 weeks ago, and he saved it with a touchdown 2 weeks ago where it was like 14 points.
Just a bare minimum, I think.
So it was like, all right, so he gets another week. So it's like he survived, and then obviously he performed this week. So I think that offense, they both can operate in that offense. So it's hard. Kupp has shown obviously no reason to even think about benching him. He's a stud this year. But Woods, there's enough. That is a good passing offense. I think I don't know, unless your team's stacked. I think Woods has to be in your lineup week in and week out.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's move on to our next storyline at 110, Andrew.
All right, let's talk about it. Kyle Pitts is here. He
has
what we've been waiting. I guess all of us were so optimistic. We thought it was going to be week 1, that he was going to be right out of the box, just killing it. But that's seldom the case, even with some of the best rookies, let alone tight ends. So it was really nice in week 5 to see him on a really far travel game to finally get involved the way that we hope to see him. Don't leave him on the line blocking for any. I want to see him getting 10 targets and putting up 9 receptions for over 100 yards. This is what we want to see out of him. We want to see touchdowns. And I really think when you actually look back at his stats, it's not that he was lacking target. Like we talked about it before. He wasn't lacking in the snap share or in getting a number of targets and the opportunity, but that offense in general was just not on the same page. And you can see it based on 4 receptions on 8 targets, 5 on 6 was over it, but then 2 on 3, 4 for 9 last week. That, like, just a lot of those, like, hovering around like 50% reception rate. So it's really nice to see him very efficient at 9 for 10 this week. You got 119 yards and a touchdown, great performance, and I expect to see much more. Yeah, he's definitely. Does he do enough blocking to qualify as a tight end? I don't know.
He had some nice blocks in that game. I was watching, and like he had some blocks. Like he's not terrible on that.
He needs to continue that, so no one does some weird, position correction. Like he has to stay a tight end. That's like awesome, But he does. He lines up wide a lot. Which is great. Which is awesome for fantasy. It was fantastic. A lot of his highlights this week were, split out wide.
But so does Darren Waller, and he's kept that.
Yeah, they all
came into the league.
So good. I'm not concerned in that because I think might be like a revolt. Like I think he might.
Yeah, he's not to the comment on the screen. I don't have any concerns that he loses his tight end.
Sleeper, if you're listening, if you do, I'm removing all of my leagues that I use through you. Yeah. Whoever does that, like you're gone. We're boycotting. Like no more leagues.
I mean, it's fine if he has a tight end / wide receiver. I'm fine with that. But keep that tight end thing. I mean, Cordarrelle Patterson is probably listed as QB on Sleeper as well. Like he's just got every designation.
He is a super flex.
He is the super flex. That's what Cordarrelle Patterson is.
Yes.
Let's move on to our next topic. Jay at the 111.
Oh man, we can't talk about Pitts for another hour. I could talk about him forever.
You can. I also historic event. Jay also chooses Pitts.
First time ever. No, we've doubled up. I'm gonna let's go to George Kittle. So we'll keep it in the tight end realm just here to kind of transition it here. This guy placed on IR, calf injury. He has to, I think, this week counted, so I think he has to miss 2 more if I'm not mistaken. They have a bye week this week, so the earliest he's coming back is week 9. This was a guy who was only averaging the 10th most fantasy points amongst tight ends at this point, using the average since he's missed a game. And this is a situation where I think I still like George Kittle, but my concerns with him coming into the year is kind of exactly what's happened so far. He's just too much of a tight end. Where we're just talking about Kyle Pitts, who's not really a tight end. Kittle's just too much. They use him blocking. He likes blocking, and he's such a physical player that this is what happens with him. It happens routinely the last couple of years where he gets nicked up. He misses games, which obviously is not good for your fantasy team, and not good where you had to take him in a startup draft and any redraft drafts that you had. He was in that top tier of the top 3. He's usually the 3rd, but he was routinely the 3rd. Now I think we got to readjust that a little bit, where I think he kind of slots back, and he's a little bit in a mix with Pitts.
So our tight end tiers go Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz,
Dawson
Knox.
We hammered this out last night, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And then,
I mean, that's literally the top 5 right now is, I believe it goes Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, and I think the next one is TJ Hawkinson, or it's someone else
playing the role of Logan Thomas.
Darren Waller. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's weird. I mean, that's something that we'll talk to. Actually, I just want to move on to our 12th point real quick, and I do want to say Dawson Knox. I do want to bring up Dawson Knox because he's tight end 5 on the season. He's one of those guys that I think is a sell now guy, even though I don't hate the talent. I think he's going to be but he's at such a fever pitch. He's at such a level where he's performing, but he only has 24 targets on the season, and he has 3 games under 5 targets. He only had 3 catches Sunday night in what was a huge game for him. He has 5 touchdowns total. He has under 50 yards in 4 of his 5 games. So is he a guy who you want to be holding on to? Exactly. I think he's like every other tight end. I think you really have Kelce,
him or Schultz. So you put Schultz in the same category, because I feel like are you a little bit more in on Schultz?
Schultz has a higher target share, so I'm a little more in on Schultz. But I'm selling
24% this past week and 16 the week. It was 24 2 weeks ago, and then 16 this week. So.
It's not terrible. But it's not in the same range where I think he has the same points as Darren Waller right now. It's like him, Schultz, and Waller have right around the same points. I just think it's a sell high window on those guys if you can. I think because of scarcity at the position.
What else do you have? Yeah, that's
exactly. But if you're not a contender in Dynasty and you have Schultz or Dawson Knox, I think you sell him right away. Sell him high, because it's just I don't know. Sell for something if someone has who's a contender has Pat Freiermuth on their bench, sell for Pat Freiermuth in a pick, in especially in a tight end premium league, something like that, Cole Kmet and a pick, something like that.
Cross position it. You're ideally you have something else and you have them. That'd be great. But
I mean, if someone has Elijah Moore and is a contender and needs a tight end, and you can be Dawson Knox for Elijah Moore in a tight end premium league, I'm doing that every day of the week.
Yeah, because the tough part at tight end is just what do you do when you need it? It's such a tough position. There's just not a lot there. It's scary.
It's not. But then you look at Robert Tonyan this year. He's tight end 32. He's tight end 32. There's 32 tight ends.
If they become Robert Tonyan, you should have traded him for anything. I guess just anything. 4th, 5th round picks. How many rounds does your rookie draft go? Just take anything.
I mean, I guess it's just I feel a lot about them as I feel about Austin Hooper, or felt about Austin Hooper, is I feel this is a high watermark. if you're a contender and you don't have any other options, like if you don't have Waller or Kelsey, then you're like, I'm riding these guys because what else am I gonna do?
Knox could be a little bit to defend him a little bit. He profiles a little better than those guys. He's more athletic. He's a little bit. He caught a 50-yard. That doesn't happen for every tight end. Like that was down the field. Like I think he got drafted in the 3rd round. A little bit more capital there than some of these guys we're talking about that are more like
but how many of these guys though that are out there? Mike Gesicki, Hayden Hurst, as another one. Dallas Goedert, Noah Fant.
Like a little bit more of a chance there. Where the range of outcomes. Yeah, there is a downside, but I think there's
this is how tight ends get you. They reel you in with their athleticism. They let you down.
I'm prepared to be let down again. I'm not saying to go buy him. I'm just saying I think there's a chance that it's not like this is it. This is the high watermark. Dawson Knox is Robert Tonyan next year. I think he could be have a little bit more staying power.
Yeah, I hope so. But I mean, we'll see. I do think if you can sell. Jesus, this is a good comment.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, granted, you throw the ball to Cole Beasley, you're at a higher rate. You're a close contact already for the COVID protocol. So let's stay away from targets to Cole Beasley. Let's move on to just some honorable mentions I want to throw out there. Some injury roundup. CEH placed on IR after spraining his MCL. Juju Smith-Schuster likely out for the season with a dislocated shoulder. Possibly his last game as a Steeler on that 1-year deal. Also, want to, we went over the Giants injuries. We want to mention Davis Mills had kind of a nice showing there. Maybe there is something there with Davis Mills. 21 of 29 for 312 and 3 touchdowns against the Patriots. No slouch of a defense. Darnold has struggled this week. 3 interceptions, under 200 yards, and a loss to the Eagles. It'll be interesting to see whether that is a bump in the road or a regression to the mean. One last thing I actually wanted to talk about right now. We're like 5 games into the season. I feel like we have a little bit better of a picture of what's going on. We talked a little bit preseason about this. MVP shortlist for the season. Who you got on your shortlist there? I'll throw one out there right away. Josh Allen is the obvious one.
He's the
Or are we talking NFL MVP?
NFL MVP.
He's the front. He'd be the ranked one. Like if you were doing the NCAA college football, their power rankings. Josh Allen would be one. I would say for sure.
I'll still say Derrick Henry, but Dak Prescott's in there. I feel like he's got that comeback from the awful injury story.
Yeah, Dak Prescott's in there.
I'd put Herbert above Prescott, but
I think they're both at plus 600 on FanDuel, so they're pretty even in the betting odds. I think they're there. Kyler's still up there for me. Derrick Henry's on my list too. His betting odds are like plus 8,000 on FanDuel. So I would take some.
Team's not that good though.
If they make the playoffs though, and he continues to have the kind of season, right? For what would it take for Derrick Henry to win the MVP? That team would have to make the playoffs, win that division at a reasonable record, and he would have to rush for at least. He would have to break the rushing record in 7 games. That's the only way it happens. But plus 8,000 on FanDuel, put some money on there.
If any of those quarterbacks sustain what they're doing, just not going to happen because quarterbacks just get that award. But
yeah, and I feel like we're throwing everyone around, but then the final winner's just going to be Tom Brady. he's destroying it. He has 15 touches on the season. I think he's second on the year in yards. I think he's only thrown 3 interceptions or something like that. He's having a ridiculous season. That team's gonna be contending for a 1 seed. It must just be Tom Brady. I think that's probably the smart money at this point.
Yeah, he's got it works against him that he's won before. That hurts you.
I know, but people are like, he's 45. Give it to him. Or 44.
Josh Allen wins the award if they go 14-2.
If they're the 1 seed, it's Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is the odds-on favorite. If we're gonna power rank these, it's Allen, it's Brady, then it's probably some mix of Murray, Herbert, Prescott.
Yeah, they're all. Yeah.
I think that's a good. Anything else? Any other honorable mention storylines you guys want to throw out there?
Kickers suck. We already said that, but
kickers do suck.
This is why we eliminated it from.
This is ridiculous. In week 5, kickers missed as a total in the league 12 field goals and 12 extra points. What?
I was making that joke early on Sunday, and it kept happening.
It happened into last night. Rodrigo Blankenship missed one.
Whew.
I now believe there's a legit reason to get rid of kickers in real football as well.
That's fine. Just let them throw it through the uprights.
No, all 2-point conversions.
I'm for it.
It's going to be an 8-point game.
I love it. I'm all for it. That's a good place to end it. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to another live stream edition of the Brothers of Dynasty. If you want to catch the podcast, remember to subscribe on Facebook, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Just follow. It's scrolling below. Just look at that. Subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you want to listen to the ears only edition, and thank you as always to my two brothers, Jay and Andrew. Thank you, Jay.
Yes, thank you, Josh. It's Moat Mountain. I got it. Moat Mountain.
Dan, thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Josh. And mine again was Boaton Woods Brewery. Buttonwoods? Oh, yeah, alliteration's tough.
Nailed it.
It's really hard. It's very hard. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. I don't know. That's all you have to say. Thanks so much. Remember to subscribe to our Facebook page, Brothers of Dynasty, and follow us on Twitter at Bros of Dynasty. I'm DFFJ Chris on Twitter. Jay is at JC_DFF, and Andrew is at DrewC_music. You can see those right here on each of our things. Look right there. Jay's is over there. Jake, point to it. You can do it. There it is. Andrew, point to your name. Point to your name, Andrew.
Oh, I can't do that.
Worst of all of us. Anyways, thanks so much. Remember,
get out of here.
That's it. Have a great night, everybody. Enjoy football this week, and we'll catch you next Tuesday. Bye.